Welcome to round 2 of the Napa Auto Parts Irish Tarmac Championship, the Circuit of Ireland Rally. Good Friday it is. One stage Ivy Hill ran twice, and as you can see, conditions are tough for the crews. Let's jump in and get their thoughts.
So Matt, you won in 2024. It's Good Friday. Have you got a good feeling for this weekend?
Probably not as good a feeling as I'd like. Last event didn't finish too great for us, so we've got a bit of confidence rebuilding to do. But you know, it's familiar ground. I go quite well in the wet, although we've not driven this car in the wet before, so there's a few things to overcome, but all in all, if we stick to a decent process, we should be somewhere near.
So Casey came second last year. How are you feeling for this year?
Let's see how it goes. We obviously have got off to a good start to the championship, so maybe we'll, with this kind of condition now, we might try to better ourselves into it and see how it goes. These conditions can be tricky and it's a long rally, so we'll see how the first few go.
So Callum, you've had a late start to 2025. This is your first rally. How are you feeling?
Looking forward to it. It's been 6 months since my last one in Cork, so looking forward to it. Bit of excitement, pity about the weather, but
I know.
Yeah. So, look, hopefully it should be too bad when I'm in the car with the heater and stuff going. But
you'll be warm. And it's Good Friday. Have you got a good feeling? Are you going to strive for the top?
I do have a good feeling. I'm going to take that anyway as a good feeling, so it should be good. So
Perfect. Well, sure, we'll catch up and best of luck.
Thank you.
On to those slippery stages then, and it would be an early lead on day one for Keith Cronin and Mikey Galvin. They were finding it hard to predict the grip levels in the stages due to the amount of standing water and mud already on the roads, but they managed the situation to lead by 9 seconds at the end of day one. Despite their time away, it would be a great start for Callum Devine and Noel O'Sullivan. They made some changes in service between the two stages, and that helped, allowing them to chase down the lead of the event in second place. Last year's winners Matt Edwards and David Moynihan were running first on the road, which might not have been a disadvantage, but it would certainly have been a little daunting in the conditions. They gained confidence as the day went on and lay third, 6 seconds back from Devine. Josh Moffat and Andy Hayes had a good feeling in the car after switching back to the Hyundai for this event. They had no issues really to report other than a small amount of damage to the front from clipping a bale, but they too were happy to round off the day in fourth. Karen McCourt and Barry McNulty would have a big moment on stage one when Karen misheard a note and the corner tightened, but they got away with it and completed the rest of the day without any incidents to lie in fifth overnight. Eddie Doherty and Tom Murphy felt they were way too cautious on these stages, but they did gain some confidence on the second pass and put in a good time to lie in sixth. James Ford and Neil Shanks made a great start, lying third overall after stage one, but an overshoot on the second stage cost them some time, and with the tight margins at the top, it was enough to drop them down to seventh. Declan Boyle and Patrick Walsh also dropped a couple of places in the second stage, not for any particular reason other than the conditions, and probably backing off just a little more than they would have wanted. They ended the day in eighth. David Kelly and Arthur Kieran struggled on the first stage of the loop, unable to get into any kind of rhythm at all. The second pass went a little better, but they were really just trying to get through the opening day for a proper push on day two. Rounding out the top 10 were Paul Barrett and Dara Kelly. They had a couple of moments, but nothing that would stop them reaching the end of the day in the top 10 place overall. Michael Boyle and Dara Mullen started the event as they would unfortunately go on, with a spin on stage 2 that lost them some time. They'd also have an overshoot and a stall in there too, and it wouldn't be the last issues they had this weekend. They ended the day in 14th overall. Leading the way in the modifieds were Barry Morris and Darren Curran. The Darien pair were keeping things neat and tidy, or as neat and tidy as they could in a high-powered rear-wheel drive car in these conditions. Their lead in the modifieds would be over Damien Toner and Adon Gallagher. They just wanted to get through day one in a good position to go into day two in a good mindset for the longer day ahead. The modified leaderboard hadn't looked like that on stage one though, as it was David Moffat and Martin Connolly who were fastest on the opening test. They spun the car on stage two though and dropped down to third in the category. Adrian Hetherington and Ronan O'Neill, like everyone else, were finding the conditions tricky, but they were enjoying themselves at least. They ended the day in 4th in the modifieds. A couple of scary moments were enough to keep Fergal McGuigan and Michael Moran on their toes and get them to the end of the day safely with 5th in the modifieds. There would be bad luck for Frank and Lauren Kelly. They picked up a puncture and had to pull over to fix it, losing a few minutes in the process and dropping down the order, now with no chance of a good result this weekend. In the RC4 class, the leaders were Ben McFall and Damien McCauley. They put in some good times, especially on the second pass of the stage, to take that early lead by almost 20 seconds. Second in the class were Seamus Goodfellow and Declan Campbell, with nothing to report other than the slippery conditions that were greeting everyone else, so they were glad to reach the end of day one. And for Sean O'Martin and Michael Ward, it was third in that class battle. The gaps, however, were going to take some closing up on day two, if the result was going to change. The Historics would be taking on the full event this weekend, and leading the way after day one were John O'Donnell and Paddy Robinson in the BMW. Their lead would be over Hugh McQuaid and Declan Casey, 15 seconds the difference after the two opening stages. For Marion Evans and Anthony O'Sullivan, it would be third. That could have been different, but the pair had intercom problems and that of course slowed them down. So with day one complete, here's a quick reminder of the top of the overall results with 2 stages complete here on the Circuit of Ireland. On to day two, and it's safe to say that the conditions hadn't got any better. In fact, in places it was worse. But for Keith Cronin and Mikey Galvin, the overall lead seemed to be relatively safe. Over the 3 stages in the morning loop, they extended their advantage to 25 seconds. That lead was still over Callum Devine and Noel O'Sullivan. They were setting themselves a pace that felt comfortable for the conditions, which was enough to hold on to that second place for now, but they weren't catching the leaders. The surface water on these stages was a bit of an eye-opener for Matt Edwards and David Moynihan, but thankfully with some good notes they were able to push for some good times. An overshoot on the second stage of the loop, however, would be a slight setback in their pursuit of Devine. Eddie Doherty and Tom Murphy were still just doing their own thing at their own pace. The conditions on the stages meant that a good result would go to someone who targeted a finish on the event, and there was too much to risk by pushing too hard. They lay in 4th overall. James Ford and Neil Shanks were now climbing back up the results, but that didn't mean they were without their problems. They had an overshoot on stage 5, but they weren't the only ones to do so, and they ended the morning in 5th overall. We would unfortunately lose Karen McCourt and Barry McNulty on this loop. They were going well, but retired on stage 5. They would return later in the event, though, to get some seat time. Gary Jennings and Rory Kennedy also suffered a setback on this loop. They'd been climbing up the order, but a puncture midway through stage 4 cost them a handful of time. Things were going okay for Declan Boyle and Patrick Walsh. They were enjoying a good push. The car was set up well and coping with the conditions, and they reached the end of the loop in 7th overall. Paul Barrett and Dara Kelly were another crew to have an overshoot on this loop, but at least it only resulted in a few seconds lost and nothing worse. They took it easy on some of the shiny tar sections and ended the morning in 8th. David Kelly and Arthur Kierans weren't too happy with how things were going. No major issues, but just being a little untidy and not really on a pace they wanted to be on. They got through with only a few near misses and were in 9th overall. Rounding out the top 10 were Michael Boyle and Darragh Mullen, which was somewhat better than they would have expected, given that the pair were barely getting any clean stages without a spin or overshoot dropping them some time. There wasn't any change to the modified lead. Barry Morris and Darren Curran continued their advantage at the top, although they did comment that there was probably more water inside the car than outside it now, with the amount of standing water on some of the stages in the loop. Second place would change, however, with David Moffat and Martin Connolly climbing back up the order and into that second place now. They had an overshoot in the final stage of the loop, but the times were good. That meant a drop to 3rd place for Damien Toner and Adon Gallagher. 2 spins for the pair on that final stage of the loop would be the cause of their drop down the standings. Ben McFall and Damien McCauley were settling into the second day with some caution. The conditions could catch you out at any time. They did manage to keep hold of the RC4 class lead though. And indeed the class wouldn't change, with Seamus Goodfellow and Declan Campbell keeping hold of their second place on the morning stages and staying out of trouble as they did so. Rounding out the podium places in the class were still Sean Ogmartin and Michael Ward. They were just happy to still be going, so holding on to that third place was a bonus. There would be some changes in the historics as we lost our day one leaders with oil pressure issues. So the lead was now in the hands of Hugh McQuaid and Declan Casey, and they'd almost 30 seconds of an advantage. With the intercom fixed for day two, Marion Evans and Anthony O'Sullivan were able to get back up to a pace they were happy with. They were going well and lying second in the historics now. And those issues freed up a spot for Andy Johnston and Jim McSherry to lie third in the class now in their Vauxhall Chevette. Day two would see the junior rally joining in the fun, and leading that would be Stanley Orr and Michael Gibson, not the regular junior runners as they were in the Micro Challenge this weekend. The first of the regular junior crews would be Roland Dorian and Mickey Brown, who also led the way in the J2 class as well. So, with the morning loop of stages complete, it's still Cronin who leads, the times opening up throughout the top of the results now too.
Keith, you're leading the rally. You are taking to these roads like a duck to water. How was that last lap?
Yeah, okay, but it is really tricky. Look, we could get caught out as easy as anyone. It's that tricky out there. So a long way to go. 6 tough stages to go yet. So it's not nothing of a lead really in conditions like that.
Yeah. So Callum, you're second place. Conditions are just treacherous, but you've got great pace. How was that last loop for you?
Yeah, look, it's a lot worse than it was last night. Water's still coming down, and yeah, very, very tricky. For myself, I'm just probably struggling to find my braking in places and get the confidence back up. And yeah, look, the pace isn't too bad considering Keith is a bit quicker there. But yeah, we're ahead of most of the rest of the pack, so we're kind of in a good position in second.
Yeah.
But yeah, you'd love to be fighting for first. But look, we're not going to put our neck out here at the minute because it's the tricky conditions, and how to and get the confidence back up.
Matt, you're sitting third for day two. Is there any lessons learned from that first loop going into the next round?
Yeah, it's just very wet.
Yeah.
Not a lot to learn really, we're just trying to find a bit of pace. I don't think I'm driving bad, the car feels good. There's obviously just a bit of confidence lacking somewhere, so just got to try and find that somewhere, and we'll just put some new tyres on and go from there, because we've worn through the fronts on the last loop, so we had a big overshoot towards the end of that, which that's the explanation, which is fine, so you can deal with that when you know why. So yeah, new tyres and we'll go again.
So Barry, you're here, day two Circuit of Ireland, you're still leading the modified. How's the grip out there and how is the car set up for you?
Car setup's fine, it's just a lot of water, a lot of strong water.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of mud pulled out, but you just have to be cautious. And we lost the wipers in that last stage, so it was interesting. But no, they've it fixed now, so ready to go again.
On to the middle loop of 3 stages on day 2, and just as we saw in the morning, Keith Cronin and Mikey Galvin would extend their advantage at the top, now a lead of 39 seconds. Callum Devine and Noel O'Sullivan were in no man's land a little. There wasn't much chance of them catching the leaders, but they would have to watch out for the threat from behind, so they were doing their own thing and managing the pace to keep hold of that second place. Matt Edwards and David Moynihan were gaining more confidence now. The second pass over the stages meant that they'd some idea of what to expect and where they could push. They didn't manage to gain any places, but they would go into the final loop just 10 seconds behind Devine. Despite trying to do their own thing and keep out of trouble, there was a spin on this loop for Eddie Doherty and Tom Murphy. It didn't really affect the results though, as they remained in 4th place overall. We did though sadly lose James Ford and Neil Shanks when they went off on stage 7 and had to pull the car off the road and retire. Gary Jennings and Rory Kennedy were putting in some great times on this loop, and if it hadn't been for the earlier puncture, they might have been further up the overall results a little. For now though, it was 5th place overall. Things weren't going the right way for David Kelly and Arthur Kierans. They had an overshoot and stalled the car on stage 7, losing a little time and some confidence in the conditions, but they did still hold on to 6th overall. One crew who had impressed so far this weekend were Sam Tuzel and Max Freeman, with this being the first visit to the Irish stages for the Jersey driver. And by the end of the middle loop of stages, they found themselves rounding out the top 10 overall. Sam was here for experience of the Irish events and certainly couldn't have picked a more challenging introduction. Things in the modified class wouldn't change much, with Barry Morris and Darren Curran still leading the way in the Darien. They were even starting to enjoy it now that they knew what level of grip to expect. It was still David Moffat and Martin Connolly in second. They were having a bit of an untidy run in places with a couple of overshoots, but they held second place with 3 more stages to go. We would though lose Frank and Lauren Kelly. They'd been on the back foot since their earlier issues and weren't really pushing for a result, so the concentration wasn't there and their event ended on stage 7. Ben McFall and Damien Macaulay extended their lead in the RC4 class to over a minute. On any other event that might have seemed like a comfortable lead, but with the conditions still as tricky as ever, nothing could be taken for granted. It was still second place for Seamus Goodfellow and Declan Campbell. However, that would change when the pair retired after this loop with clutch issues. It would be all change in the historics. We lost Hugh McQuaid and Declan Casey when they retired with a bent axle. So that meant the lead of the class was now held by Marion Evans and Anthony O'Sullivan, who were still clawing back that lost time from their day 1 intercom problem. With just 3 stages to go, the results at the top of the leaderboard still looked very familiar here on the Circuit of Ireland Rally.
This is the last loop of the rally. How do you feel going into it?
Yes, look, anything can still happen. The conditions out there are really tricky. We have a good lead, but it's getting quite caught up out there in terms of there's a lot of cuts now across Tara and things like that, so you could get a puncher very easily. You've no choice but to go into the cut because it's loose gravel on the outside of the corner. So yeah, look, we've a good lead. We can afford to back off a bit, but anything can still happen.
On to the final loop of stages then, and a look at the final overall and class results. In Class 8 it would be victory for Anthony O'Brien and Michael Laverty, who led by a significant margin at the finish. In Class 9 there'd only be 1 finisher, so that position would go to Donna McElherron and Ciara Duggan in the Mini. In the juniors there would be no change for Ronan Dorian and Mickey Brown, as they continued to the end of the event with the J2 class lead. But there would be a change overall and in the micros, as we saw a new leader and eventual class winner in the form of Andrew Bush and Geraldine McBride. In the historics it was a 3rd place in class for Josh Douglas and Matthew Rooney, but they were some way off the crew ahead at the finish. That crew were Andy Johnson and Jim McSherry, 2nd historic, and the pair had gone well overall too with 22nd. But beating them to the historic win would be Marion Evans and Anthony O'Sullivan. This certainly wouldn't be what they'd expected when they'd had those intercom issues on day 1, but to finish first you have to finish. And that was something that Sean O'Martin and Michael Ward would find out the hard way when the previously 3rd placed RC4 crew left the road on stage 9 and went no further. With that change and the previous loss of Seamus Goodfellow with his clutch issues, it would be 2nd place for Callum Graffin and Mark McGeehan. Not the way they would want to take it, but they would be happy enough with that finish this weekend. And that meant it would be the win in the RC4 class for Ben McFall and Damien Macaulay, a win that never really looked in doubt, and the pair had a good run to the finish for that class win.
Ben, you won Class 5 here at the Circuit of Ireland. Congratulations. Well, how would you sum up the last 2 days?
I would say it's probably the most craziest rally I've ever done in my life. We've had everything thrown at us. The conditions were probably the worst I've ever rallied in, but it was definitely a great learning curve for me. We had a technical issue there going from into the last service. When we left service we pulled in at the side of the road. We thought we were out, but I managed to get it sorted and just got her home to the finish.
We lost Adrian Hetherington and Ronan O'Neill on the final loop of stages from the modified battle, mechanical issues putting them out of the event. For Fergal McGuigan and Michael Moran it would be 3rd place in the modifieds this weekend, and as well as that the pair also took the Class 6 win for good measure. Damien Toner and Adon Gallagher weren't having the best weekend. A puncture on the previous loop lost them a handful of time, but they managed to get back up the results and took second place in the modifieds at the finish. Despite only being back for the seat time, Karen McCourt and Barry McNulty were still pushing. Actually a little too hard in places, taking a trip into a hedge on stage 9. They got away with it though, and mostly enjoyed their no-pressure run on the final loop. Unfortunately for Sam Tuzel and Max Freeman, their great debut on the Irish lanes had not gone entirely to plan. After lying in 10th place, the pair retired with punctures on the penultimate stage. Still, they did take away so much experience from the weekend. Rounding off the top 10 at the end of the event then would be Johnny Mulholland and Ryan Farrell. They'd had a good run all weekend and stayed out of trouble to end the event with the class win and 10th place overall. The weekend had seen a good outing for Barry Morris and Darren Curran. They reached the end of the event in 9th overall, and with that they took the modified win. A good finish, especially with this car in the tricky conditions.
Barry, we're here. Circuit of Ireland is finished. You came first in the modified. How are you feeling?
Over the moon.
Yeah.
And, still hasn't sunk in, so that's the first modified win. So no, thanks to Darren and the team, because it was a tough 2 days.
I was going to say that was a tricky rally. It just changed every stage.
It was. I don't think I've ever experienced any conditions like that. So, but the outcome was good. So happy.
The rest of the results, however, were about to see a big shake-up on the final loop, with rally leaders Keith Cronin and Mikey Galvin suffering a puncture on the penultimate stage and dropping down to 8th overall. A shock development in the story of the event, but it wouldn't be the only one. Having gained pace all day, it would be a good finish for Ryan Loughran and Gareth Doherty as they moved up the order and ended the day in 7th. Declan Boyle and Patrick Walsh picked up a puncture on the previous loop, damaging their chances of a better result, but they kept out of trouble on the last loop and reached the end of the event in 6th overall. A good finish, all things considered. Having spent a lot of the weekend going round in circles or overshooting junctions, it would be a welcome finish to the event for Michael Boyle and Darren Mullen in 5th. Certainly something they wouldn't have expected before this final loop, but they would certainly take it. We unfortunately lost Eddie Doherty and Tom Murphy on this loop. A double puncture saw them without enough spares to get through the stages, and they were forced to pull over. If you'd said to Paul Barrett and Dara Kelly that they'd have 4th place at the end of the event, they probably wouldn't have believed you. But with some good times, a careful drive and staying out of trouble, they were able to claim that 4th position at the end of the event. The drama on this final loop wasn't over yet, however. As well as losing a number of our top runners already, we'd also lose Matt Edwards and David Moynihan, as they retired on the penultimate stage with suspension problems. So, all of these separate issues changed the results dramatically, with 3rd place now going to David Kelly and Arthur Kieran's. The pair thought they had a puncture on the penultimate stage, but it was just the conditions, so a measured drive to the finish was called for. One crew certainly not expecting to be on the podium after their earlier puncture were Gary Jennings and Rory Kennedy. They'd put in times that would have seen them fighting for a podium without the earlier issues, but to still take 2nd place was a very welcome end to this round. Nobody would be more surprised and delighted with their result than Callum Devine and Noel O'Sullivan. They came here with minimal seat time and put on a good show for a likely 2nd place, but to see the dramas unfold on the final few stages made a win possible and gave them a late but credible boost to their championship campaign. Before we chat to the winner, here's a quick reminder of the final overall results here on round 2 of the Napa Auto Parts Irish Tarmac Rally Championship.
Callum, what a weekend. The last service for Chanty are consistently just great pace. Are you delighted?
Yeah, delighted. We were just, as you said, last service, we were just looking to hold on to 2nd.
Yeah.
Shame for Keith, obviously. He was going well. Some issues with brakes there, but I think he's still going. Maybe he's 4th or 5th there. So, but we had to get round. We're delighted. Very, very tricky last loop. There was so much mud, and the roads loads of holes been made, so yeah, we're trying to stay away from punches, but yeah, thankfully we got around it okay.
And this is your first outing of 2025, so what a great way to start the year.
It was good. We 6 months layoff, it's not too bad, so yeah, delighted. And it's good obviously for the championship. We missed the first round, so yeah, opens the championship up. That should do anyway, heading to the next round, so delighted.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.